such wonderful but large lies that Ted told about the talents. But what I want to do today is really introduce a panel session here that has a lot of executive talent on it. And these are individuals that are leading their companies to multi-year growth paths. It's a very exciting growth path that spans not only activity in shales, gas and oil, but in international operations around the world. And so the format for this panel will be to introduce individually each speaker, and then once we go through the panel, I'd invite the audience to be taking questions. You can either write them down and pass them up or grab an open mic, but after the panelists are completed, we'll go into a question and answer forum that will facilitate. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chuck Davidson, who's the current chairman and CEO of Noble Energy Company, a very successful independent oil and gas company with operations throughout the Rockies, the Gulf, Oklahoma, the mid-continent areas, but also internationally with some significant world-class discoveries off of Israel. Chuck has, prior to Noble, been several executive positions with Vastar and Arco. So please join me in welcome Chuck to the podium, please.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate being back. It's always great to come up here, and it's also really fascinating to see how the themes of this conference evolve and change as our industry changes as we go forward. So I think it's very appropriate that this panel and for I think at least one of the other panels that has been here is talking about unconventional oil. It's not that it's necessarily replacing unconventional gas. We've got a long way to go on that, but it certainly is an evolution in this tremendous period of where we're developing new resources here in the U.S. So what I thought I would do is I'm going to just open up for a few comments on Noble Energy, but I'm not going to go into a great deal about our activities really that's outside the topic of this panel. I want to get back and talk about what we're doing in the area of the unconventional, and particularly what we're doing here in the Rockies, in the Wattenberg area, in the DJ Basin. So I'll launch right in. This is just where we are, and I think Jim covered it nicely in the overview. We're a company that we do have a strategy of being diversified, so about half of our business here is in the United States and the other half is outside, primarily in West Africa and the Mediterranean, which is Israel. That's our global positions, and here in the U.S. in the Deepwater Gulf of Mexico and onshore in the Rockies. We do try to keep it diversified, not only from a geographical standpoint, but also from a commodity standpoint. So if you look at our production mix down on the lower right pie chart there, you can see that we're roughly about 40% liquids, 30% U.S. natural gas, and 30% international gas. So it gives us a nice diversification to our portfolio. We are an exploration company. We love to explore, and we've had some very nice success over the past several years. In fact, over the past 5 years, Noble Energy has discovered some 2 billion barrels of new resources. That's, put it in perspective, that's 25 times our annual production. So it's a lot of factors going together, but in our models, you have to have 4 to make exploration work. They're shown at the top of the chart. You've got to have the right people, the right strategy, the technology, and the processes. So the exploration has led to what all of us keep track of very closely, and that's our resource inventory. I focus on net risked. You can talk about unrisked all day long, but you really have to risk it. Net risk, which is the middle bar chart there, is about 4.6 billion barrels equivalent today for Noble Energy. When you think about that, that's about 4 times our proved reserves, and it's just under 60 times our current production. So what does that do for you? Not a whole lot. Having 60 years of production out there, I'll tell you that last 30 years has got very little value by the time you put a discount factor on it. So the whole idea, and clearly the whole business, is all about trying to move that production forward and develop the resources. We're fortunate that a lot of these resources are tied up into major projects. We've got a long line of them coming up. There's 9 major projects that will count. I'm going to talk about one of them, which is at the top, which is the the horizontal Niobrara in just a couple of minutes, because that is a major project for us that will allow us to develop a lot of resources. But there are several others as well on the chart. We'll be bringing on 1 to 2 new major projects every year over the course of the next 6 to 7 years. So let me switch a little bit out of Noble and talk about the environment. And I think Dan gave us a great lead-in on the environment, and so I'm just going to try to touch on a couple of additional points. One is that horizontal drilling is a real game changer for us in the U.S. It is what, along with stimulation technology, is opening up the unconventional resources. Also, we're seeing that the pace of activity is really breathtaking, and as a result, it's putting a stress on all of our resources, both internally as well as externally: people, equipment, material, infrastructure. But also, the pace of the activity has brought a lot of attention, and I think we heard that this morning from our speakers. Attention from the public, attention from regulators, the government. We can't ignore it. It has to be addressed. We're under a spotlight. We need to make sure that we can assure everyone that, and I am confident that we can do our job safely and in a way that protects the environment and protects the safety and the communities that we work in. So this is, I was trying to check real quick with Dan's chart, and fortunately it agreed very closely, so I don't have to work my way out of that, but it's based on the same database, so it's Baker Hughes. There's one other line that's added on to it. The red is gas, the green is oil rigs in the U.S., and then the dashed blue line is horizontal. And you can see there's the point that Dan made that we now have more rigs drilling for oil than natural gas. The other point is we now have over half our rigs in the U.S. that are drilling horizontal wells. This is a chart that I started to prepare a few months ago, and I pulled back on it because I just wasn't confident of the trend and what I was reading into it, but I decided to go ahead and put it up again. It spans a broad period of time. This is U.S. oil production starting in 1920 going to the current. And, when I looked at this chart, I just kind of stepped back, and it was a few months ago, and the trend wasn't there. I said, wow. For 25 years, U.S. oil production has been on what appeared to me to be really an unbreakable decline. The last uptick, and you can see it on the chart there, started in the late 70s. That was really when Prudhoe Bay and Kuparuk were coming on stream on the North Slope in Alaska, and then on top of that, or following that, was we saw a movement in oil prices, and we started to see a real drilling boom. But of course, that hit the wall in 1986 when prices collapsed. To Dan's point, all bets are off when prices change, and we saw oil production starting to decline, and quite honestly, many of us were not sure whether it would ever reverse. And then all of a sudden, something interesting happened, and it happened over the past 18 months. And you can see it there on the left-hand chart, and it's blown up on the right-hand chart. And you can see now that very definitely we're starting to see a creep up in oil production in the U.S. When John Hofmeister talked this morning about adding 1 million barrels back, and that would create $30 billion, well, we're halfway there, because there's 500,000 barrels that have been added back since the low in 2009. And so we've got about 15 billion of John's 30 billion because of what is happening, and that is we've got growing U.S. oil production for the first time in several decades. I think what's even more dramatic is you take into account that offsetting this from the mid-2009 to April of this year, the federal waters of the Gulf of Mexico oil production dropped about 12% from the peak there, and that's, of course, because of the incident there and the moratorium. I think we would all expect to see oil production to continue to drop. So that's kind of the setting, and I'm going to talk a little bit in my time remaining about what we're doing here in the DJ Basin, again, as we're pursuing the liquids-rich play in the Niobrara. This is our basin picture right now. We're up to 840,000 net acres. We grew it very rapidly. If you would have looked at this in December, a little over a year ago, it would have been about 350,000 net acres. So we added to it through an acquisition and then built onto it with our leasing. But we're right now running 8 vertical rigs that will drill 470 wells this year. We've got 4 horizontal rigs running in the Niobrara, and we're adding a fifth later this month. You know, it's all in the, for us, it's the Wattenberg is a real focus point, and you can see it here. This is an amazing field. Jim Volker was telling me earlier about a well you're drilling in the you see the DJ sands there on the left-hand side of the chart. He was telling me about drilling them in the early 70s, and there it is. And that's where the field was in the 70s. You look at where it is today as it's gone through all these evolutions, and now I think what we're seeing is it's now evolving into another redevelopment with the horizontal development of the Niobrara. We're focusing in Wattenberg. We've had some great success there. We've now drilled a number of wells. As we look at Wattenberg today, we see some 2,000 plus locations for horizontal drilling in our acreage in the Niobrara, some 600 million barrels of resources. Our results continue to improve when we look at a rolling 12 well set. In other words, looking at the last 12 wells versus the prior 12 wells, we've seen IPs either on a 24 or 30-day basis that are up 10 to 15% versus the prior set. So we're continuing to move forward, and the whole name of the game is to continue to accelerate it, thus the reason for adding another rig. This just shows the type curve that we're using. We're right now on an average Niobrara about 310,000, but certainly with the good results we've been getting lately, we're continuing to see that curve move up, so stay tuned on that. This just reflects what's happened in Niobrara over the last several years. I've come to this conference several times in the past. Really, I've come, I think, almost every year since Noble and Patina joined back in 2005. Back in 2006, our net production was around just under 40,000 barrels a day equivalent of, but it was 70% gas and 30% liquids. Since then, we've grown total production in Wattenberg by 55%, but we've grown our liquids production by 180%. Focusing on the liquids-rich areas, but also moving into the Niobrara and the horizontal Niobrara, and you can also see today that 13% of our production is now coming from horizontal wells. So again, we're trying to move the program forward. Drilling times continue to decrease. This just shows the drilling times for a horizontal Niobrara well. It started at about 20 days. We're very, very common now to see 10 days, although there's a little bit of apples and oranges in there. We've highlighted one where recently we, instead of drilling a 4,000-foot lateral, we got carried away and we drilled a 9,100-foot lateral, and we did that from spud to rig release in about 17 days. So great performance by our teams and continuing to look at different things and move out and challenge, but also push the boundaries. So it's all about learning. We'll continue to take what we're learning in Wattenberg and extend it to the other areas of the DJ Basin where we're not as active. We know we have a huge position in Wattenberg, so our focus is there, but there's a lot of learnings that we can take as we go forward. So I think in summary, just to wrap up, I'm really encouraged by what the industry is doing today to shift to these unconventional oil plays. They've got unique challenges, but they're making an impact. Domestic production is now growing after several decades of decline. And clearly we're seeing that the oil plays are competing with the gas plays, and at least right at the moment, the oil plays are winning in terms of tapping into resources and certainly attracting our investment dollars for the reasons that Dan mentioned. So while a lot of headlines are on for oil shales, we also understand that one of the real prizes that many of us think about is all the reservoirs we have, all the oil reservoirs we have in the United States, and how this technology can be applied not only to oil shales, but to more conventional, but maybe perhaps oil reservoirs that had low recoveries. We can go back in with the new technology. So I think there is a chance that we can certainly continue to grow our domestic oil productions with the caveat that Dan mentioned, that it all depends on the economy and our prices that we see. But it's certainly a great opportunity we have in front of us, and I'm really proud of the small part that Noble Energy can play in that. With that, I think I'm ready to turn it back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Chuck, and we appreciate your views and certainly support in the Wattenberg field. So our next presenter is Jim Volker, who's Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Whiting Petroleum Corporation. Jim has served with the company for many, many years, seeing the company rise up through rapid growth in the Williston Basin, and we look forward to hearing some of the stories of the successes that are yet to come.